Let me introduce my panelists first, and then we'll set out what we're looking to discuss. We have three wonderful panelists to discuss this topic of Vaishnava masculinity. We first have Vrindavanath Prabhu, who's a second-generation devotee who grew up in New Vrindavan, New York, and Asia. And after experiencing, in his words, a painful divorce, he began the journey of redefining and understanding what it means to be a man in this world, and in particular, a man on the path of bhakti. He brings an insightful perspective on the role that masculine modeling can have on future generations. He's currently living in New Vrindavan and is a disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Swami, taking initiation in 1998. We also have His Grace Madhvacarya Prabhu, who's a disciple of Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He took initiation in 1991. He's a father of 3 boys who are now all men. With his wife, Kunti Devi Dasi, he has hosted in their home the Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology for 25 years. He is a physician and specifically an anesthesiologist. And I only found out this morning what that is, and I'm still not 100% sure. And he's been doing that for 30 years from Washington, DC, where he lives. And then finally, we have His Grace Anuttama Prabhu, who was, as many of us know, he was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1976. He has held a number of roles and responsibilities within ISKCON, from a book distributor to a temple president to a GBC member from the year 2000, a board member for Bhaktivedanta College, the global minister for communications, and I think he's also the founder Acharya of the Mantra Retreat. I'm not sure about that, but I think he is. He's based in Washington, DC, where he lives with his wife, Rukmini Devi Dasi. And so we're gonna, this panel is really, the topic is Vaishnava masculinity, and we're gonna jump into some discussion with the panelists. And I just want to start by saying that I think this topic, for those of us on the panel, kind of came up as this is a topic, the broader topic of masculinity is something that I think wider society is really grappling with in a number of different ways. And I think it's important for us as men within ISKCON to also engage with that dialogue. I think the 2 key things that mainstream society is looking at when it comes to masculinity, the first is around the idea of gender. And is gender a biological construct or a cultural construct? And that's the main discussion that's going on right now. And to give an example, here in the United States, indigenous communities here in the US traditionally had a very fluid understanding of gender, that there was men and women, but you had feminine men and masculine women. And then you also had transgendered people. So in the indigenous communities, you had this sense that gender was a fluid idea. And then with the arrival of Christianity, with its more narrower understanding of gender based on the idea of Adam and Eve, you saw that that became the normative understanding of gender, that there was only 2, men and women. But we understand that across the United States and across the world, there were different understandings of gender. And I think the other discussion that's going on, which we may be aware of, is around the role that men have in society and the power dynamics that they hold due to their positions of leadership. And, we see examples, what they call toxic masculinity, and, the examples of Harvey Weinstein and other individuals like that, where men in positions of power do things which, quite frankly, they shouldn't be doing, and are oftentimes either supported by other men or other men turn a blind eye to the activities of men. And so this conversation is not to be a negative conversation, but to be a positive space where we dive into what does it mean to be a Vaishnava man? And what are the qualities and attributes that Vaishnavism from our acharyas and our tradition bring to this topic? And how do we contribute in ISKCON to this understanding of Vaishnava masculinity? But then also, how do we then contribute to the broader conversation that's going on in society as well? So I'm really excited for the conversation we're having today. We'll have a discussion with the panelists for about 45 to 50 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So please, like in the previous session, keep your questions coming in the chat room, and then we'll get to them towards the end. So I want to really start with Vrindavanath, a dear friend of mine, to really, this term Vaishnava masculinity, what comes to you? What comes in your heart? What comes in your head when you hear that phrase? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for the invite to share and be part of this. I tend to be a little analytical. So So when I think of Vaishnava masculinity, I'm thinking about, well, what do these words mean? Vaishnava and masculinity. And we know Vaishnava is a servant of Vishnu, or a servant of Krishna, a worshiper of Vishnu. And masculinity is often defined as the qualities or attributes that are characteristic of men and boys. So putting those two together, we can come up with a definition of qualities and characteristics, attributes of a man who's aspiring to be a servant of Krishna. And in kind of preparing for this panel, I stumbled upon a letter that Srila Prabhupada had written about his formation of the League of Devotees in Jhansi in 1956, where he wrote out what he was hoping to do, how he was hoping to inspire men in his new society. And he wrote that I'm hoping to evoke in members of this society sattva guna. And then he listed off the qualities, if you don't mind, I'm going to look at them, that Lord Krishna listed in the Gita to Arjuna. Those qualities of truthfulness, forgiveness, equality, tolerance, education, purity, knowledge, and faith in transcendental service to Godhead. So this is kind of one definition that we can take into our hearts of what Vaishnava masculinity is as a person in ISKCON, as a person on the path of bhakti. And from this description and from other descriptions, we also learn that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to be men of character, men of integrity. There was one interview, I think it might have been London, where someone asked Srila Prabhupada, how can we tell devotees apart from non-devotees? And Srila Prabhupada simply replied that the devotees will be perfect gentlemen. And when we think of the word gentleman, we think of someone who takes responsibility for their actions, who's considerate, who's courteous, who's polite, who's kind, who will hold the door open. And so that type of, you could say, uprightedness is also what was encouraged or defined as a person on the spiritual path, coming to the level of sattva guna. And implied in that is also this, this man of service, which is a term that some of us have heard in other men's groups, how to be that man of service, that person who also thinks about the impression that they put out into the world, and also how they're honoring themselves and also honoring others. And that overplay of how someone else's association affects me and my association affects someone else. So there are some thoughts.
Yeah, it's great, Vrindavanath, and we'll dive into some of those ideas in a bit. I want to pose the same question to Madhvacarya Prabhu. What comes to you? What arises for you when you hear this phrase Vaishnava masculinity?
Well, with your forgiveness, I'd like for you to indulge me for a moment. I just wanted to discuss something that's a little tangential, perhaps, and it's the subject that you brought up in your preamble. So men and women are different. It's interesting from a medical point of view, or from a scientific point of view, that actually beside the gross difference in sex organs, that their brains actually, men and women, boys and girls, their brains develop differently. Different areas of their brain develop and become more prominent at different stages of life in boys versus girls. And so because our brains develop differently, this lends itself to, these are generalities, but this lends itself to some difference in terms of patterns of activity and behavior and proclivities. And so these are generalities, but they're real. But we just want to also make the point that although we're talking about Vaishnava masculinity, that there are those whose individuals, I mean, the universe is full of variety. So there are individuals who don't develop exactly according to the general theme. and who are in male bodies but don't identify with their, in any way, with their genitalia or with the role of a male. They don't have those type of patterns and proclivities, and likewise with women. So I just wanted to say that although we're talking about Vaishnava masculinity, certainly within Srila Prabhupada's house and within spiritual community, there's room for everyone, despite where you fall within that spectrum. It's all part of we're all part of the same loving family devoted to caring for each other and devoted to reawakening our relationship with God. The second point I wanted to make is something that you also alluded to, and that's one of my favorite expressions: context is king. So we're having a discussion about Vaishnava masculinity in a society which is patriarchal, yes, where there is tremendous male privilege and power. So the question is, how are we using this privilege and power as men? And one way that we're using it is in the domination and control of women. In this country, there's a sexual assault every 73 seconds. In this country, 1 in 6 women are raped or there's an attempt of rape on them. 1 of 6 women in this country. Pornography is one of the biggest industries in the world where women are objectified and degraded. There's still a very large and active global sex slave trade in the world. So in our Shastra, it talks about women need protection, of course. Part of a man's responsibility is to protect women. Well, yeah, that's true, but women need protection from men. They need protection from us because we are exerting this dominance and exercising our aggression in a really destructive and unhealthy way, both for women and for our own selves, for our own spiritual identities. So that's the second point about this. We're having this conversation about Vaishnava masculinity within the context of the epidemic of violence against women, physically and psychologically. So now, specifically more about Vaishnava masculinity. I didn't become a devotee until in my mid-30s, and so I was just raised in the world. My father was a typical man, very stoic, emotionally remote, and although he had some good qualities, he was prone to spasms of violence, both against my mother, his wife, and his children. And so, this is something I observed in the world. And, but I, was so blessed to come to contact with Vaishnavas and become a part of a spiritual community. And just as I was introduced to the spiritual community, my subjective view was that a lot of that overt aggression, of course, and objectification of women was gone within the spiritual community, which is very wonderful. But still, the power dynamic is still present. So, the ideal qualities that are advertised for men are supposed to be protectors and warriors, which is good, but we need to balance those with other qualities. So we can be protectors and warriors at the same time. We can be supportive and empathetic. We can be leaders. This is advertised as a male quality. We can be leaders, but at the same time be collaborative and readily seek compromise. We can be task-oriented. This is, advertised as a male quality. But at the same time, respect process, give voice and space to emotions, and cultivate and really hold in high esteem the importance of relationships, developing relationships. So this balance of our natural male proclivities balanced with these other extremely important qualities are, I think, make for an ideal masculine Vaishnava.
Thank you so much, Madhvacarya Prabhu, drawing upon your medical expertise, but also your own experience, before and after, joining ISKCON. That's, really deep, and really want to dive into that a bit more, but want to give the floor to Anuttama Prabhu to, pose the same question to you, which is, you've been in the movement now for most of your life. What does this term, what does this phrase mean when you hear it and you hear people talking about it?
I'm going to reflect some of what I've heard from my two fellow panelists first. Some of their comments are coming up in the thoughts that I wanted to share. I first go to Prabhupada saying that, as Vrindavanath said, my disciples are perfect gentlemen. We can understand in ladies, but it's not a ladies retreat, so let's say in gentlemen. And I looked up briefly, what is gentleman? One who's chivalrous, one who's courteous, one who's honest, one who's open-minded, respectful, and polite. And oftentimes we're not very polite, we're not very respectful, we're not very open-minded, etc. And I think to a certain extent, the concept of masculinity, or what it means to be a male, has actually been poisoned in our society. I think it's a little poisonous. And I think I think part of that is due to a misunderstanding what the goal is. And I think it's partly when we're not very mature in our understanding of Krishna consciousness, and that can happen geographically, and certain communities maybe aren't mature, certain ages aren't mature, certain individuals aren't so mature. But I think that immaturity is when we think that renunciation is the goal, which it's not. The goal of the Krishna conscious movement is not renunciation. We just heard from the Brahmachari, a couple of experts on that, about how the importance of integrating. The goal of our community actually is to love God. That's the goal. And all of its parts and parcels. And, sometimes though we think that the goal is renunciation, and it peels off into thinking, okay, I'm supposed to renounce my family. I'm supposed to renounce responsibility. Progress means I become irresponsible. I renounce education. It's all just a slaughterhouse. We heard Kunteya talked about some of those issues, but we take it completely out of context. We think that I'm supposed to renounce sex. I'm supposed to renounce women. And of course, for, brahmacharis and sannyasis, the sexual relationship with women certainly is renounced. For grahastas, it's meant to be spiritualized. But the problem comes, we artificially think the goal is to renounce, and then we allow ourselves to become inimical against those things that we think we're supposed to renounce. I think this Madhvacarya was talking about this more directly. Like, we're supposed to renounce women, so women become, they're bad, because they agitate me. Well, the problem is not the women. The problem is my being agitated, and even more so my being disturbed by the fact that I'm being agitated. So I think as Vaishnava and as men, we're supposed to engage all our material propensities in the Lord's service. So for most men, it's natural to have a job. It's natural to have a family. It's natural to have a wife. It's natural to have kids. Those are good things. Those are positive things. But if we think that we're supposed to renounce all these things, we get confused. We don't know how to interact with them. And it really impacts us, where instead we're supposed to just do everything for Krishna. So the roles may vary. Maybe we'll talk about this later. Some of us maybe go to work. Some of us stay home and take care of the kids. Some of us do priestly activities, and our wives go out and make all the money. Some of us do the laundry. Some of us cook. Some of us, whatever, however it might work in your situation. But it should be artificial. And I think somehow we've kind of adopted this ideal from the larger society that, being a man is, masculinity is you're the tough guy, you're macho, you're like, Elliot Ness on some movie or something like that, or you're whatever. But I look at our models, I think are people like Arjuna, who was, the greatest warrior, the strongest fighter. And yet I was looking in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, a couple just quick references. Arjuna is going through, we know, famously arguing with Krishna why I shouldn't fight. Prabhupada says in purport 145, all of these symptoms are due to the soft-heartedness resulting from Arjuna's being a great devotee of the Lord. So Arjuna is soft-hearted, Prabhupada is saying. And then later, Prabhupada also expands a little more. He says that all these considerations, the different arguments that Arjuna gave, prove that he was not only a great devotee of the Lord, but he was also highly enlightened and had complete control over his mind and senses. The fact that he was worried about his father and his teacher shows what a great devotee he was. His desire to live by begging, although he was born in the royal household, is another sign of his detachment. He was truly virtuous, as these qualities, combined with his faith in the words and instructions of the Lord Krishna, indicate. It is concluded that Arjuna was quite fit for liberation. not just because he was ready to fight, which we understand later, because he was a little freaked out of his compassion at the nature of that situation. Of course, Krishna enlightened him, you need to do it for me. But I think we need to look for that as our model more. And just one final thing about Arjuna, for those just in the Grihastha ashram, you remember the famous story of Ashwatthama. Arjuna wasn't sure how to punish him, and he said, Draupadi, what should I do? He asked his brothers, he asked the king, he asked Krishna, and then he wanted to hear what Draupadi had to say. So, listening is also an important quality of good masculinity in a healthy state in this age. So I'll end with that and look forward to more conversations with everybody here.
Thank you, all three of you, for your opening remarks. I mean, that set the stage for a wonderful conversation. And I want to pick up on something that you said, Anuttama. One of the first things you said, which is that you feel in many ways masculinity in ISKCON has become poisoned or poisonous. And I'm wondering, I was thinking about this earlier, that in the early days, and obviously you were there, and I only have second or third hand information, but you lived through it. It seemed like in the early days, our masculine role models were the personalities from Shastra, Prabhupada, but then also the male devotees around Prabhupada who were leading the movement in really exemplary and wonderful ways, but all of whom grew up in a Western culture. And I saw someone put in the chat box, Chuck Norris, and I sometimes feel like we've normalized behavior in ISKCON to be a very Western, influenced very much by Western culture and Western understandings of what masculinity is, and that recognizing that and not really understanding that there are other forms of masculinity in different parts of the world. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you have, or what you do to kind of shift the narrative or that modeling, and to be someone of integrity as you see aspects of masculinity in our movement which could be poisonous or not so healthy. What have you done as a person in a position of responsibility in the institution, but also just a man who has other male friends who maybe in the past have fallen below the standards of what's expected of them? Just wondering how you've been able to navigate that.
This one's for me?
Yeah.
Well, one thing, I think we have to look at the history. And I think in the earliest years, I actually came a little late in that era. I came to ISKCON in 1975. There was a period of time, and I think scholars are going to be writing about this more in the future, and there's a lot of books coming out recently about Prabhupada's relationship with his women disciples that are looking at this in detail. We went through a period of time when we did the opposite of what Prabhupada said. He said, take the best of the East and the best of the West. So we sent all these open-minded, enthusiastic, creative, adventurous, young men from the West, sent them to India. Instead of coming away with an adoration of women as their mothers and respect for tradition and, touch your grandparents' feet, they came away thinking, okay, women in the back. 1976, I was there in India. The GBC passed a resolution, all the women out of the temples, all the men out of the temples, and they brought it to Prabhupada. The temple presidents complained, and Prabhupada said he overturned it. This isn't what we're all about. So I think part of it is we have to go back and look at the history and really look very deeply, what the culture is, and make sure we're taking the best of the East and the best of the West. And in practical ways, I think we have to be ready to challenge when we see things are wrong. And somebody mentioned in the earlier conversations, his name was Anuttama Prabhu, about being brave. And sometimes it's hard to be brave on your own, but in community we can be brave. And I think that means we have to stand up to stuff. I was there in 1996 when Madhvacarya Prabhu brought a bunch of young former Gurukula students together to speak to the North America leaders, and 9 out of 10 explained that they'd been abused. And it was the biggest culture shock I've ever experienced. So it took courage for those young men and women to come forward. And I think it took some courage for devotee leaders at that time to say, we got to take this seriously, we have to fix it. And, later on, the Gras Division team, part is a member of that, around 2005, I think I'm going to really say we got to strengthen our family. So to look, and domestic abuse, just 2019 in North America and then internationally, an official policy about domestic abuse. And hopefully all of you are going to make sure you get some posters inside the women's bathrooms in the near future. Those are out there now saying, hey, if you're being abused, this is not Krishna consciousness. Madhvacarya mentioned, sex trading. I pray to God there's none of that anywhere connected with this gun, but we know there's domestic abuse. So to call these things out and to just bring them forward and understand that that's part of our duty as men. Madhva mentioned, being leaders and being strong. Part of our duty is to be able to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. course, to be open to the fact somebody else may say, well, how do you know it's not right? Let's debate it. Let's discuss it. Maybe you're wrong. But if we see something that's wrong, to stand up and say, okay, let's fix this. It's my time. It's my time to fix this problem.
Yeah, I love that. It's my time. It's my responsibility to fix the problem. And Vrindavanath, I'm wondering if I can go to you, because in preparation for this panel, you and I had a great conversation last week, and you really opened up about your experiences of growing up within the movement in New Vrindavan, and the kind of the positive and negative role models, male role models that you had in your life. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit, as you feel comfortable, around how you've personally experienced male masculinity modeled and Vaishnava masculinity modeled for you as a child.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, every individual has a different experience based maybe on our karma, maybe on our impressions, even though we may be placed in the same environment or place. For me, I grew up in New Vrindavan, the kind of a rebel outpost of ISKCON, and not always part of ISKCON. And what was modeled for me was not necessarily that gentlemanness, but more of a mission orientation, a passion to accomplish, to build a community, to raise a lot of money. And with that, actually, there was a kind of focus or a discouragement for people to focus on sadhana and learning, book knowledge, and more of the, you could say, devotional aspects in the temple, more to like working with the land, construction, and fundraising out in the world. And the Gurukula, from what I experienced, was kind of a place where the kids were housed. So physically, we were taken care of. We had nice prasadam most of the time. But emotionally, many of us were not really taken care of. Our parents were off working. Maybe the Gurukula was a place where we can kind of stash the kids so that the parents could be free to do missionary activities. So that was my experience. And from that, not having that strong emotional kind of connection with men, with women, adults. Although we had amazing, it was wonderful to grow up in this place where there's 2,000 acres to run around and kind of be there with our peers. The modeling that came from my parents' generation wasn't there. And that left me honestly with, and many Gurukulis, I believe, in different varying ways, with some insecurities around what it is to be a man, what it is to be a human growing up in the world. And along with that, there was also the impression, we were given the impression that, okay, go out and make a lot of money and work hard. Not so much to be that, you could say, respectful devotee or sincere devotee in the way of like taking japa seriously, or studying, or the culture, maybe we could say, of bhakti, the softer qualities of respect for others. It was more of a harder, get things done kind of approach that I kind of inherited. I hope that's educational.
That's great. And would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit like how those formative experiences have impacted or inform your life at the moment in your journey? Because I think it's an interesting journey that people could learn from.
Sure. So going forward from maybe the childhood years to maybe early adult, further in life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember at one point, all of the Gurukulis older than me, I'm 42 right now, so they were 5 to 10 years older, like they'd be about 50 now. But say they were in their late teens, early 20s, they were all out on what was called the pick. So just selling stickers to make money. So they were doing the same thing that was kind of modeled to us. No college education, kind of a transient lifestyle. And honestly, I kind of inherited a similar approach, also because, my mother was a big fundraiser. She was a top collector. So I was, this is going a little deeper, and I could share this because I've been blessed to have worked through this through therapy and other kinds of things to have some insight into what was going on for me. But I kind of internalized that to get love means you have to have financial worth. Because that's what all these parents were doing, or at least my mother and many others. And so they were leaving us for something. So that something must be more important. And that was fundraising in a big way. So I took on, and a lot of us took on this thing, okay, we have to be successful. And if you look at some of the Gurukulis from New Vrindavan, for anyone who knows them, there was kind of that passion to do that. And in some ways it was useful, but also, I mean, I was lucky to have a different modeling experience. So when I was 19 or so, and for some years before that, I just was inspired to start reading the Gita and actually, like, what is this philosophy and culture that I grew up with? I wanted to kind of understand it through my brain, And so I was lucky to kind of dive in and go to Mayapur. And I lived in India for 1.5 years, where I met like so many wonderful devotees who were modeling something completely different, a culture of love, a culture of respect, just joy, chanting and bathing in the Ganga. And I was lucky to live in the Chowpatty temple for a while. So there was kind of a different perspective. But then when it came time for me to come back and go to college, and then I eventually got married, I was gifted with a wonderful partner. She came from a Gurukula ashram. She had never been with another man. And somehow my brain, I switched to be like, okay, life is all about success now. From what I learned, and I totally neglected her. I totally just and eventually the outcome after 9 years of marriage was a divorce, where she just was like, I was focused on education and career success. And once that divorce kind of happened, I'm just sharing because I think part of this is about vulnerability and us kind of understanding our psyche. What it is to be a man navigating these things is that I honestly didn't know how to go forward, because everything I had I thought I was doing things correctly, and then there was a big shattering kind of event. And so that for me was kind of like, okay, how do I rethink maybe what I grew up with? What do I really want as a person? Maybe not taking on the impressions that were given to me. What makes me happy? And that was a process of like therapy, men's work, and just time sitting with myself and connecting with men. And, by the time the divorce happened, I had kind of shifted away from close devotee friendships and, was not in great association. So I kind of got a lesson that, and I dove into that a bit, that there's a lot of emptiness. A lot of people are, in partnership and different things we spoke about. They're like looking for some fulfillment out there in the material world. And there was one evening where I was just in my little apartment in San Francisco, and I just said, I don't want to try to reach out to one more woman for a date, to try to fill this emptiness in my heart. And I put up this little picture of Krishna that someone had given me, and I just started chanting again. And I said, Lord, I'm here, this is who I am. I don't know what I am. And I think from there, that was about 4 or 5 years ago. I think that's where the joy and the beauty kind of started to come back into my life, is in relationship with where I could give my heart and really cry out and chant and reestablish for me this path of bhakti that in a different way than what I grew up with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vrindavanath, for sharing it. It's a powerful testimony of just how your experiences of Vaishnava masculinity, or just general masculinity in your early years, in formative years, really seems like have long-term repercussions in your life, where in one sense you almost had to lose Krishna to find him again, and the last 5 years you've been on this almost a journey of rediscovery to Krishna and to his devotees. Madhvacarya Prabhu, I'd love to bring you in here because I think, there's things that Vrindavanath was sharing, which you also shared around coming from a background of maybe some unhealthy modeling as a child. So I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to reflect on in that respect, but also in the respect that, you are a community leader. You don't have, as far as I know, you don't really have a formal position in ISKCON, but yet in the Washington, DC and North America and in the wider ISKCON society, you are seen as a leader. People look up to you and ask for your advice and guidance. And so I'm wondering if how you model this good behavior and what you draw upon to ensure that the positive role modeling that we all desperately need in our life, how you do that. I'm wondering if you could share a bit.
Well, I have a fantastic partner who I love. And one of the things that impressed me when I first came to the devotional community, to ISKCON, is that it seemed as if to say you love your wife, you're in love with your wife, openly and enthusiastically, was kind of discouraged a little, subtly. Do you know what I mean? But I think just thinking of ourselves as servants and how we can best serve our partner, how we can best serve our children, how we best can serve our community. And this, of course, this service manifests through our natural masculine tendencies, but focus on service is it ultimately brings happiness, because we learn and we experience firsthand that in serving those that are dear to you and having them in a safe and secure place and seeing them prosper, it makes you happy. Their happiness brings happiness to you. And that's a really important lesson that I think the Grihastha ashram, I'm a Grihastha, so I can say for sure that this lesson is very much easy to learn in the Grihastha ashram as you raise children, as you are in these various relationships. Is seeing the happiness of those around you is what ultimately makes you happy. And this is like one of the foundations of Krishna consciousness, is that by serving Krishna and seeing to Krishna's happiness and being a servant of the servant, we grow. We ultimately are the beneficiaries of that. So, yeah, that's very important to me. There's something else I wanted to say. Oh, one of the great failures that I've had as a quote unquote leader in the community was also around this area, because there was a couple that we were very close to, and the husband was abusing the wife physically, and how we handled that in terms of we talked to the couple, we talked to we had a small group, myself and another gentleman. We kind of tried to mentor him, and I just think we didn't handle it so well. And ultimately what happened is, and we love this, we're still friends with her, but ultimately she left Krishna consciousness altogether, and she never came back. She married a Mormon, and she's happily married. But that's one of my biggest failures in Krishna consciousness, is that not dealing with that that abuse in a way that where she felt more protected and felt more sheltered, and thus stayed within the shelter of ISKCON. So I just wanted to say those two things.
And I think that second point is important, because I think maybe many of us in this group may be in a similar situation where we're having to deal with an issue in our local sangha of devotees, and may not know how to address it. In that instance, if you could replay that incident, or if you were to do it again, what would help? What would have been helpful, or what will be helpful for you to address the same situation again?
So I think now, I'm sorry. I think now there's more of a mechanism within ISKCON for dealing with these situations, but where we can get more people involved and more kind of official attention and direction on how to handle it. The other thing I would have done is to do it in retrospect is I would have, to be quite frank, I would have involved legal authorities also, but because what his actions were criminal actually, and I would have involved the legal authorities because that's another means of providing protection and shelter to the woman involved.
Yeah, it's an important point. And Anuttama, wondering if you wanted to comment and on that or anything you've heard so far. But also, Anuttama, I jokingly said that I think you're the founder Acharya of the mantra retreat. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it'd be great to hear from you. What are the great things you're seeing after doing these retreats for a number of years now? I think we're in the second or third year. What are the trends? What are the themes? Like, what's the growth you're seeing in amongst male devotees after facilitating these things formally for the last few years? But I think you've been a champion of this cause for much longer than that as well.
Actually, the idea really coalesced when I was walking with Bhakti Mark Swami for a few days on one of his walks across North America. And he walked across Canada 4 times, and he walked across the United States once. And I really, really wanted to join him for at least a few days. So I flew out and joined him in California. And one of those mornings we were discussing, saying, Raj, it's so important for men to have a chance for association. And the model actually gives some credit. Years ago, I lived in Colorado. There was a group called Promise Keepers, which is a group of Christian men. And they filled football stadiums to talk about, how can they be better men and fulfill their traditional roles. And I don't know the details so much. I think they eventually kind of were criticized by women who, some women who didn't appreciate it, thought it was just another way of exerting male dominance. I don't know what their intentions were so much, but it just raised in my mind clarity that we needed to sit down and have a chance to talk among men and have that chance for association. And I think some of the benefits that have come out, I mean, for me, just sitting and listening to Vrindavanath Prabhu's discussion, what he went through, it breaks my heart to hear it. At the same time, it really renews my faith. To hear how, because of his sincerity, he went through that, and how the society let him down and other people let him down. But, he put that little picture of Krishna there, and that was enough, and sometimes, we go to big, beautiful, fancy, sometimes almost gaudy temples with, 100 deities and this and that. And it's like, it may not inspire devotion, but he put that little picture of Krishna there, and that's where he made his connection. And I want to reflect a little bit on what Madhvacarya mentioned about this experience of abuse, because it really, sometimes we talk, what does it mean to protect? What does it mean to protect? And we're supposed to protect, and we define it this macho way. And I really like what Madhvacarya said, because I think when he said failures, I started to think, well, I don't know if I ever had any failures. I've certainly made a lot of mistakes, lots and lots and lots of mistakes. I don't know about failures. And I thought, no, actually, the biggest failure that I've ever been a part of was the child abuse. And just like Madhvacarya said, those of us that lived through that era, we should have noticed, we should have spoken up, even whatever our position, a bhakta, a new bhakta, a Sunday feast visitor, a temple commander, temple president. We should have asked more questions, and not questions in terms of, we know there's no such thing as authenticity, and we know that the leaders are all this or that, and we don't want to get into that negative Rajaguna, Tamaguna space. You just criticize anything and everything, but we don't want to be foolish either. We understand that even great personalities in the material world is a place of temptation, and communities all struggle, whether we're Vaishnavas or Catholics or atheists. We all are going to face the same challenges of the temptations of power and sex and money and abuse and everything else. Pornography, we had a really enlightening session on pornography last night, which is scary, but a lot of it is just realizing that, hey, we have to be tender to these things. And I think as men, I think that's one of the important reminders that comes through in this sangha is Yeah, being men means being ready to stand up and kind of keep your eyes open, isn't it? Like, you know, like what's going on here? Is my wife okay? Are my kids okay? Is this neighborhood okay? Is this walk to school okay? Is the government okay? You know, is the local leadership okay? And not that we sit in the back by the prasadam booth and complain about the leadership in our local communities, but we should be thinking, are there things here where I could step up and help make things better? And maybe we can't do much, but wherever there's an opportunity to make it better, I think that's a Vaishnav duty. And, you know, speaking amongst the guys, I think that that's a guy duty. And can I read a little story? Is there time, just like a half a page from little Prabhupada Lila?
Always, yeah.
This is a book. I haven't read the whole book, but it just came out. It's called The Bond of Love. It's memories from Vaishnavis about Prabhupada. This is something that was brought to my attention. I've read parts of it. Here this is interesting. When Prabhupada, this is written by a Vaishnavi, Krishna Kumari Devi Dasi. When Prabhupada came to the Gurukul, he always gave rasgulas or sandesh or cookies to the children, then to the ladies, and finally to the men, in that order. Interesting point. Let's all take that back with us, okay? First the kids, then the ladies, then the men. That's what Prabhupada did. You may do different things, I may do, but that's what Prabhupada did, okay? If that bears some importance to us, which I hope it does. At one point, all the children were in the temple room and one little girl wouldn't stop crying. I didn't know what to do, so I took her into a classroom and I put her in the corner on a mat and said, just stay here. And then I went back to the temple room. Okay, not the best thing, but here how it ends up. I forgot about her. And after his lecture, Prabhupada walked out of the temple room, down the hall, right to the classroom where I put this little girl. And he saw the little girl who by then had fallen asleep on the mat in the corner. She woke up, saw Prabhupada, smiled, ran to him and paid her obeisances at his feet. He reached down, patted her on the head, and had a little exchange with her. As I watched this, I had a lot of realizations. Sometimes I got completely overwhelmed in my services and I wasn't as nice to those children as I knew I could be. Watching Prabhupada, I realized that the only way to teach children was with love. Prabhupada related to her completely on the platform of love. He loved her and he taught her about loving relationships with devotees and Krishna. All these realizations were coming to me like a flash as I watched Prabhupada deal with this little girl. From that time on, I knew I had to change, to be more careful, to be like he was, loving with these children. So I think as men, again, you know, this idea we're supposed to be renounced, we're supposed to be tough. You know, that's not the example we, you know, Lord Rama cried, Madhvacarya, he loves his wife, you know. That's the example we should follow. We should pray that we be loving to our wives and our kids. And Lord Ramachandra cried when Sita disappeared. He cried when he had to do the funeral ceremonies for Jatayu. I mean, he's God, right? I mean, look at the example, Arjuna. So I think we have these really, really healthy role models, but we have to sift through and make sure, like Vrindavanath said, we're not somehow given unhealthy models, but we have to like look at those carefully, make sure they are the healthy models.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you. Can you just show the book again, Anuttama Prabhu? So, because I think that just came out recently, right?
Yeah, it just came out. It's called The Bond of Love, Srila Prabhupada and His Daughters. And there's another book that was also published recently, The Emergence of Women's Voices, which looks at the kind of history of women in the movement and how we went through that phase, this kind of, you know, false renunciation, immature sannyas, ashrams, ladies out of the temples, which didn't go through, but the culture was still there. And kind of practically the fight of women and some people that have supported women over the years to get more facilities. And I'm not going to get into it, but the fight goes on in many ways to make sure women get full facilities in our society.
And I actually want to pick up that because moving over to some of the questions that have been coming in, we've got a few questions already, and please keep putting them in the chat box. Question I want to pick on, you know, that builds on your point just there, Anuttama, and Madhvacarya, wondering if I can pose it to you, is that the question is, and I think the broader topic is that I think some devotees, especially some male devotees in our ISKCON society, are scared, apprehensive, concerned around women being in positions of leadership. Not just the female Diksha Guru issue, but even just at a local, regional level. You know, you're in Washington, D.C., you have a wonderful woman who's the temple president there. How do we address that? I mean, where does that fear come from? Is that a healthy fear? Is women being put into positions of leadership something that's good for our society? Just wondering if you could just reflect a little bit on that from your own personal experience.
Is this to Anuttama?
It's to you, Madhvacarya Prabhu.
Oh, okay.
If you feel comfortable answering.
No, I mean, where does it come from? I mean, I think that, you know, everything that's in the general society, quite frankly, the misogyny that we see in general society, also there's a residue of that within spiritual communities. There's no question. I mean, we bring those prejudices with us when we come. And, you know, we're in a process of purifying ourselves so that we can see each other just as spirit souls. But, you know, that's a process. It takes time. Let me just arrange this.
It's a great demonstration to make your point about how it takes time in a process so we can see each other. Thank you for making sure we get the point.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So, but I mean, one thing that I always focused on was that because how I came to Krishna consciousness, I wasn't introduced to the larger community, the temple community. I came kind of through the books originally and through a very small community. And so by reading the books and then understanding the principles or trying to understand the principles, then later I came into the larger ISKCON community. And so those principles are so beautiful, that we're not the body, we're spirit souls, and that we all have this amazing loving potential that we're in the process of realizing. And so that principle is irrespective of what kind of body you're in. I mean, this is an essential and beautiful principle of our foundational principle of our philosophy. And so women taking more of a leadership role is just a realization of that principle. It's just that principle in action, that, you know, whatever body you're in, black, white, woman, male, if you are inspired to serve Krishna and the devotees in this way, then this is something that should be encouraged, respected, and appreciated. And so, as I said, you know, our old patterns of how we deal with women or think about women, sometimes we bring with us, but we're in a process of breaking those down, and we should actively try to break those barriers down and see the fulfillment of these principles, the realization of these principles in our communities and in our lives.
That's great, and that builds on, that leads into another question that's come in, and Anuttama, I want to address this to you, which is that it's an interesting question, which I'd never really thought of before. If we agree that, you know, we're all, you know, spirit souls, we're all equal on the spirit level, and, you know, the body is just the material coverings, then what are the differences between men and women? Is it, and this person posed the question, is the difference just that men have a responsibility to protect and make sure we're not too destructive, or is there something more fundamental in terms of what are the respective roles between men and women in our Vaishnava Sangha and culture?
I helped put the chap together for the Gras Division team in their course about roles, and we worked on it for weeks, and we kind of came back with a conclusion which says whatever works. I mean, you know, there's couples, we see them in ISKCON where they don't go anywhere unless the husband is 3 steps ahead and she's in the back. And there's other times you see couples and, you know, she's 3 steps ahead and he's in the back. And there's other couples you see where they're walking shoulder to shoulder and they don't feel comfortable anywhere else. And there's couples, again, I mentioned earlier, where she's making the money or where he's making the money or she's raising the kids mostly. And I think in this day and age, we can't, as it came up in the Brahmacharya panel, we can't have things too stereotyped. There are kind of general patterns. You know, you read some of those books, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I mean, there's definitely different patterns, as Madhvacarya was saying about, you know, men generally, we don't multitask as well as women do. We tend to kind of drill down. And that's an advantage in certain situations, and it's a disadvantage in others. So I know I remember years ago, just as a devotee, getting some preliminary understanding of astrology. I don't know much about it, but just, you know, seeing things like, okay, you can run really fast, but it also, that means you have the tendency to trip. or you're really insightful, but you're puffed up because of it, you know? So all of these things have pros and cons. And I think a lot of it, we have to be self-critical and see our own limitations. And then we can, you know, then we can determine, you know, what roles fit. Like if we say, well, you know, real men don't stay home and educate their kids. I got some friends that stayed home for a couple of years and put their wife through college. So she got a degree and now he's working and she's doing this and that. So I think it really varies, depends on the situation. The key element being, we say it again and again, but it's the fact. Whatever helps you become Christian conscious, that's what really works.
That's great. Vrindavanath, the question came in, which actually is perfect for you. Someone's asking specifically around the organization Men's Work, which I know that you're part of, and you know, I was wondering if you could talk about what that organization is, and just more broadly, like how men can support other men, and what kind of modalities and, you know, structures we can create so that we can be in supportive relationships with other men as we navigate our lives.
Yeah, so Men's Work, how to be in connection with other men. Yeah, we need each other to get through this. And, you know, men have the default, maybe from conditioning and biology, to oftentimes feel that they have to carry the burden alone. And it leads to these addictions that are showing up. I'm hearing some devotees talk about pornography, or alcoholism is much higher in men. These different things where there aren't healthy outlets or connections with others to share our burdens with, to kind of, you could say, link hands to move forward in life with. So, I mean, just in my case, someone mentioned to me the men's organization, the Mankind Project, which is the eminent men's work organization in the world. I think there are about 60,000 men, and they hold these amazing weekends where men come together. It's kind of, I think, like this weekend, but maybe with a boot camp style of, you know, getting in touch with our emotions through physical action and activity, screaming, but also journaling and just opening the heart. And more the base of what that organization does is hold weekly meeting groups, men's groups around the world. And so I've been sitting in those groups and also facilitating on weekends, different processes. It's really deep stuff based on the work of the psychologist Carl Jung, and like the archetypes of, like, we're going to find our gold as an individual, meaning our mission, our purpose in that place where the shadows are. So it's kind of very in line with our bhakti tradition, that we, in this material world, we have our ego and spirit. So we have this covering, but underneath, in our true essence, is Atma, is the permanence. So, yeah, what I learned in my experience in my life so far was that I tended to do the same thing that men typically do. Like, I felt shame for not being successful in marriage. I felt that I was a failure. And so I think we go through life feeling that oftentimes as men, we're assumed to be invulnerable in some ways, to accomplish, to be providers. And oftentimes we don't meet that mark based on our own metric of who we're supposed to be, or based on others' metrics of who we're supposed to be. So coming together with men, I found, is that we're all just, I mean, some use the word broken. We're all just human, you could say. None of us is perfect. And sitting in circles with other men, hearing them share their journeys, and taking off the hat, you could say, of I'm trying to fix someone else, but just having these spaces where we can share vulnerably. And part of me sharing so vulnerably earlier wasn't necessarily to blow anyone out of the water, but it was to model a little bit of vulnerability, and that it's so helpful and useful for us to do that in our life in order to not feel so burdened. And in that, you know, there comes an empathy and an understanding, like, okay, I'm going through something, but there are people I can speak with. We oftentimes don't want to, you know, we don't feel comfortable sharing with our spouses or partners or certain others. And in these men's groups where there are no women, we can oftentimes just be more vulnerable, open up without fear of trying to look good or something like that. So I found it exceptionally useful just to sit together and share. And I was speaking with Anuttama Prabhu, where I shared a little bit how maybe more of these men's groups could be useful in ISKCON as a way that we can go at it together powerfully, encourage and inspire each other. And you could say sort of like hold hands and share the burdens. I hope that was helpful.
No, that's great. Thank you, Vrindavanath. And it seems like in the chat there are some individuals who are expressing you know, interest in maybe having groups like that. And you know, some of us actually do have a group like that in New York City, and you know, it's been going well for about a year. And Vrindavanath and I are part of that little group, and we have had discussions about seeing if we can replicate that model in other cities and countries, you know, across the world. So maybe after this ends, maybe the organizers, we can maybe do some kind of poll. Madhvacarya, I see you with your hand raised, so please.
I just wanted to say something really quickly, just from, you know, once again, a medical point of view. You know, men, you know, as we strive to take on this, you know, ideal of what a man should be, the independence, sometimes leading to isolation, the stoicism, the focus on control, all that leads to is very increased rates of depression in men, increased rates of substance abuse in men, increased stress in men, which leads to a variety of health sequelae, increased diabetes, hypertension, strokes, so forth and so on. So these things have really real repercussions. And the type of exchange that we're talking about, men's groups where we, you know, are sharing in a really constructive and healthy way, exchanging in a really healthy and constructive way, go a long way to relieving a lot of the stress and improving our lives on many levels.
I've been asked to ask you to please be putting your questions in the chat box. We still have some time, and we still have a few questions to go through, so please keep them coming in. I'm just going to throw out some questions, and I'll have it to all of you, but Anuttama, it seems like you want to come in first.
Yeah, I just want to respond to something I saw came up in the chat box, and it's always the elephant in the room that we kind of aren't quite sure what to deal with. But somebody mentioned, well, wait, but Prabhupada said women are less intelligent. You're not talking about that. So I just like to throw a few thoughts about that, because I think we need to be able to respond to that and not run from it and try to understand what did he mean by that? What does it mean to us in the modern age? So just kind of combining his teachings along with, you know, what modern science so-called has seen. You know, Prabhupada said a bunch of places women are less intelligent. He also said if you become Krishna conscious, then you're the most intelligent. So that's one thing we should keep in mind. And we know modern research, and kind of like what Madhvacarya is saying from the medical point of view or the biological point of view, they know these days there's different types of intelligence. And men are good generally, you know, there's kind of a curve on it. Generally, men tend to be more analytical than women, but there's genius women that in analytical sciences and things like that that just make me look like an idiot. So just because I'm a man doesn't mean I'm more intelligent or more analytically intelligent than every woman. I may generally, you know, in some of these books, they talk about why can men park their cars in the garage better generally than women can. Well, because somehow the brain is a little more mathematical, spatial orientation, all that. But on the other side, women are more intelligent on insights. They're better listeners, they're better multitaskers. I read one study was talking about even like babies, like they're little, like, you know, a few week-old babies in like a nursery with a bunch of kids, like in a hospital. You put a male child next to a female child. If some other child on the other side of the room starts to cry, the female notices and starts rolling that direction of empathy at like practically a few weeks of age. So the brains, you know, develop in certain ways. So I think, you know, and we also know, you know, women, one of the downsides and one of the difficulties, challenges, women a little more than men, or there's definitely some men in this category, there's a tendency to be a little overwhelmed with their emotions. Sometimes the emotions kind of take precedent. But, you know, the history is full of kings that got too emotional and ran into battle and said the army, everybody all stream ahead, and everybody got their head cut off because they reacted emotionally instead of rationally to what was a trap, which they should have thought about. So it's not like, you know, we also don't have a history of being emotionally overwhelmed. So I think we have to kind of see those things in a balanced way. And I was just thinking a second ago, just like among our friends, we may know, say among this group, and we all know, geez, Gopal's more intelligent than Anuttama is. That doesn't mean you put Anuttama in the back of the room, or Anuttama can't make any contribution, or Anuttama is a fourth-class citizen just because Gopal maybe has a little more intelligence. We would never do that. We appreciate everybody for their respective talents. So I think we have to be really, really careful that these descriptions of women being more emotional or needing protection or maybe less intelligent analytically absolutely can't be a reason for us to abuse or to push down or to dominate further. That would be a complete misuse of that understanding. Thanks for allowing me to share that.
Thank you. And I think everyone knows that you are more intelligent than me. There's a reason that I'm asking the questions and you're answering them, you know. So
older only, not more intelligent.
Some more questions coming in. There's a great question that came in around, is there space in Vaishnava masculinity to be a henpecked husband? I'm wondering if anyone of our panelists would like to answer that. And you know, the question goes on that oftentimes men who are seen to be sensitive, seen to be the nice guy, are sometimes looked down upon in society, and maybe even sometimes in their marriage or broader family or community. So I'm wondering if any of our panelists would like to answer that about being a henpecked husband.
I don't consider myself henpecked, but my wife definitely runs the house. There's no question. So once again, the point is how to most effectively serve in such a way that you're providing an environment where others in your environment feel supported, feel safe, feel secure, and can unfold, can grow, and achieve their full loving potential. That's the only question. And so if that requires you to be, you know, handpicked and all these other goals are accomplished, that's wonderful. You're doing it as a service. If it requires you to take a leadership in this way or a leadership position in that way, then it's, you know, the point is that you're providing an environment, as I said once again, that's where people can feel safe and secure and free and nourished, and can grow in a very wonderful, loving way. That's the point. And that's, you know, that's being a Vaishnava, that's being a gentleman.
Yeah.
Gopal, Lila, one thing, Anuttama Prabhu, who's one of the senior members of our Sangha here, has asked if he can make a comment a few times, but he seems hesitant to type in his comment.
Okay.
I wonder if we can maybe turn on the volume for a minute and just let him share his insights. Can we do that in Anuttama Prabhu?
Yeah, it's we have prompted him to unmute himself so he can speak.
So Purva, if you can unmute yourself, we can hear your thoughts.
Hare Krishna. I want to ask for the prayers of all the Vaishnavas that I can possibly communicate this. What I would say is like a spurti or a realization that I've had out of listening to the last 3 sessions. And it started last night. I approached Beer Krishna Maharaj and also a godbrother about this wonderful session we had with Mahatma. And my godbrother, I was mentioning to him about the way I was trained in Grihastha life, actually Brahmachari Grihastha, and I made it a very, for me, strict protocol to chant my 50 rounds. And it may have slipped on a couple occasions, but basically, Brahmachari Grihastha is what Prabhupada emphasized. And what I'm seeing is that if the proper training is not there with brahmacharya, it's not going to come together as far as realizing and understanding how to, first of all, procreate, second of all, how to relate to women in the proper way, and to get Prabhupada's mercy. So this devotee was mentioning to me about the porno problem, and he was emphasizing that, well, you know, if you want to really eradicate that, you're just going to have to allow people to have reasonable sex life as they, you know, throughout the month. And, you know, they're not going to chant 50 rounds. And my point was that, well, if you have proper brahmachari training, you can bite the bullet and just understand that your spiritual life is going to progress a lot quicker if you do what is pleasing to the spiritual master, who is the representative of Lord Nityananda. And when you strictly follow the spiritual master's instructions, you get the mercy from Lord Nityananda. So anyway, I don't know how it's going to work, but my point here is we really need this brahmachari training, and in all facets, and open it up for discussion if you want.
Well, Porter, let me just comment as a person who hosted that last session. Were you there with Sutapa and Chaitanya Charan for the previous session?
Yes, I was.
Okay, great. So you could see there really a lot of discussion about the importance of brahmacharya, and also they gave us some tips. And I think we'll go back to them and ask if they can put something in writing about what we can do as grihastas, what we can do as communities, what we can do as congregations to help and as leaders to support that ashram. So I think that's a really good point. So we'll follow up on that. Thanks for highlighting that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Hare Krishna.
Honored to have you here. Without you, everybody that doesn't know should know, there would have never been a mentor retreat without Apurva traveling hundreds of miles with his dear wife to come and cook for all of the men, spectacular feasts. So I know at home you're probably on what we're describing as bio breaks, so you're probably running to find some dry chapati in between in the refrigerator. But next time, when we hopefully soon be together again, we hope Apurva will be able to cook for all of you. And
I definitely will, and I'm so happy to have been engaged in that wonderful service. Thank you, Anuttama Prabhu.
Apurva is also the father of Amala Harinam Prabhu, who led the kirtan for us last night from the Krishna house in Alachua.
50 rounds.
And there's the proof. Proof. Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, Gopal, Lila, back to you, Prabhu. Thank you.
That's great. I love it. Well, there's a question actually that ties in to what was just shared. Is there's a question around how do we as men, you know, be respectful to women, you know, that we're serving with or maybe in our community, but also recognizing there may be some agitation at times as well, you know, and we know that aversion is the opposite of, you know, attraction. And so we see that sometimes because we are attracted to something, we see this unhealthy tendency to like really push it away and demonize something. So how do we balance that as devotees who are working and living outside of the temple, you know, being respectful to other women, but at the same time understanding that, you know, agitation and, you know, and things happen sometimes that, you know, we may not want. So how do we balance those things?
Madhvacarya's in a hospital every day with nurses and young doctors, and you know they have whole TV series about the agitation and the natural byproduct of that in terms of social connections. Madhvacarya, I think you're uniquely qualified to answer this one for us.
I respectfully disagree. No, I mean, we're all living in the world, you know, walking and talking and interacting with everybody else in the world. We're all subject to the same temptations, right? And so the temptation that women present is no different than other temptations, the temptation for pride, or the desire for adoration, or the desire for distinction, or the desire for, you know, fame or fortune or whatever. It's the same, it's all coming from the same source, and it's all combated in the same way. And that's, you know, taking shelter of sadhana, taking shelter of wonderful Vaishnava relationships, having, really positive association, good, strong, healthy Vaishnava communities, taking shelter of the reading, all these things, all of these various avenues of mercy that are in our lives. It's just, it's the same, it shields us from the various temptations, including the temptation of improperly associating with women. Please, Anuttama or Prabhu, please, I'd like to hear your answer as well.
Anuttama, Vrindavanath, anything to add to that?
Gopal, you work in the world, and we'd originally planned the four of us not just to have you interview us, but also to hear from your experience. So maybe you can jump in on this question.
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll be honest with you, like, it became a lot easier after I got married. I've only been married a year. That kind of like helps put like a bit of a safety net there. It's easier under lockdown as well, because I'm not going outside. I'm inside all the time, so that helps. But I think in a serious answer, I think it's about, it's like knowing who my home base is, knowing where who are my people, and like I have my wife, I have supportive friends here in New York who are men who I check in with on a regular basis. And I know that although I may be having to associate with other people, women, but also just other non-devotees, I know that my true home is with the people who I designate as such. And I find that to be really helpful. I find that as soon as I start becoming vulnerable or taking shelter too much in other people or other communities, that becomes a difficult position to be in. So I'm careful that I make sure that I'm respectful, I'm positive towards everyone I work with, but I know that that relationship is of a certain kind and it can only go so far. And so, for example, I work with I do climate change work, which is mainly dominated by women. And I make sure like I don't go out to any events with them after hours. I make sure I don't go to any restaurants and things like that. And like, there's a limit that I have with them. And I think, initially they might find that funny, but if I stick to my principles and what I'm comfortable with, like they respect that. So that's how I try to navigate it. Okay, that felt awkward. So let me ask you a question.
Oh, that was great. That was, and it gets back a little bit, if I can just jump in, like the thing with pornography and everything last night. It seems to me it kind of blends in theologically. We know Krishna has the material aspects of Maya are there to offer us things. And in every step of the way, it's, am I interested or am I not interested? No, Krishna, I think I'll choose you this morning. Or no, actually, maybe I'll play a little with Maya. Maybe I'll allow my mind to go here and there. And I was hearing of Mahatma's discussion last night. I was just thinking, like you just don't walk down that aisle in the grocery store. Like that's where the magazines are. Okay, maybe you don't want to look at, none of us, we don't want to look at those magazines, but don't get close to those magazines. And I mean, I had an experience as a young devotee, I'll share, was on traveling Sankirtan with another Vaishnava. We were doing something to raise money. The temple had some small businesses for a while. We'd go door to door. And I remember we got to one little town, we turned the corner. It was like the strip bar, it was like 2 or 3 strip bars down there. And I told him, I said, I'm not going down there. We're supposed to be merciful. Lord Chaitanya saved the most fallen, but that's way beyond my capacity. I'm not going. And he was like, no, we got to save everybody. I was like, well, okay. And that person's had some, I don't know if it's a contributing factor, but some real trouble in there. They've been married a bunch of times. And I don't know, again, I don't know if that's the cause, but I think we all have to have that kind of sense of don't get too close to something, if there's some attraction, be respectful, but don't get away from that. Whether, as Madhvacarya said, if it's something that makes us prideful or something else and that's where we need friends. I've been in some situations where I've had friends just come up to me and say, hey, Anuttama, are you okay? You need to back away from this situation. It doesn't look so good. This could be a little risky for you. And I've seen situations where I've contacted senior devotees, senior to me, and said, people are concerned because you've got, one instance, a lady, secretary, and people are talking, and it looks like this might be a little risky. And they assured me, and I'm sure they were right, that it wasn't an issue. But either way, they made arrangements to make sure that, you know, that person was no longer so connected, especially when people are in a vulnerable position. You know, we know when women are in a vulnerable position, you know, men too, but I mean, sometimes women are a little vulnerable. It's like, what is it, the hydrogen element that, you know, it's got to grab to some oxygen. So we got to make sure we're not the nearby oxygen, and we can easily get pulled into some emotional or some other kind of connection that's risky.
Yeah, yeah. Vrindavanath, wondering if you wanted to come in here.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, I think guys, devotees, Prabhus, I mean, this is the disrespect for women is definitely linked to our desire to objectification of women. There's that barrier in the way oftentimes. And to my thinking, it's connected to the information that we're taking in. And I remember years ago, I think when I was 17 or so, I read something Srila Prabhupada wrote. He said that of the 4 principles, no illicit sex is the most important. And I didn't really understand it then. I'm still trying to understand it. But, you know, that sex is our gross manifestation of trying to enjoy separately from Krishna. And dealing with it, which is like our Achilles heel, is our work. Is really our work. And I think it's a serious fight. It's really a subtle energy that influences us when we're watching movies, for example, or taking in certain content, where even the value systems of those in those movies are taking advantage of women, or even are oogling at women. We're going to pick up on that value system or that aspiration of those people. And so it's really important, particular detailed work to unravel this. It's maybe our life work, it's maybe our spiritual work, and we can't do it alone. You know, only transcendental energy can purify our energy here. But I think it's a really important topic, and there's a lot to it. And making our life, aligning our life with not trying to look for enjoyment in others. So yeah, there's something there.
Yeah, thank you, Vrindavanath. And you know, the movies question is a good point. And I see Yadubara Prabhu is on the call. So, you know, only movies we can watch are all movies made by Yadubara Prabhu and coming out of his wonderful work. So we're coming up to the end of the session, and I'm wondering if, to all our panelists, if you would just like to end with 1 or 2 minutes of final thoughts or reflection or advice to all the participants going forward as we conclude the session. And we'll go with Madhvacarya Prabhu first.
I wanted to thank you for allowing me to participate. I wanted to thank everyone for their wonderful questions. And my only comment is the power of association, that, you know, our association can make all the difference in the world in our spiritual life. And healthy association, sheltering association where you can exchange openly and discuss and promote spiritual topics. It's just instrumental. And I'm happy and feel very fortunate to be a part of this Sangha. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Vrindavanath?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It feels really good to be in the company of men here as devotees. I just would like to see more of this. And my ending point and realization is very similar to Madhvacarya Prabhu's association. Comes down to association, quality association, supporting each other, enlivening each other, and being particular about and intentional about each other, being with each other as we progress forward on this path. Yeah, so thank you. Haribo.
Thank you. And Anuttama, as our token straight white man, could you give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, well, along the same lines of your joke, I would just say, you know, I was a brahmachari for a while. I've been a grahastha for a long time. I lived in the temple. I had a job out of the temple, different kind of roles. And all of those, you know, and as a man, I think, you know, being a brahmachari is great if you're connected to Krishna. You know, being a grahasta is great. I know I was nervous as anything to get initiated. It was like, nope, as long as Krishna's there, it's going to be fine. I was nervous getting married. Nope, it's going to be fine. I was nervous getting, you know, starting a business. No, it's going to be fine. As long as Krishna's there. So I'll just end. There's my favorite quote from Srila Prabhupada where he said, if we should just become Krishna conscious and enjoy life with a thrill in every moment. So I think that's the secret. You know, if we become Krishna conscious, then being a man's great. Like we talked about some of the disadvantages of being a man, some of the opportunities, you know, it all becomes positive. Whether a grahasta, sannyasi, brahmachari, a lot of money, no money, big house, wife, no wife, it all becomes positive if somehow we bring Krishna in.
Great. Thank you so much, Anuttama Prabhu, and thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all the questions that came in. Sorry we couldn't get around to all of them, but we are out of time. And I'll hand back to the organizers. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.